Welcome to Open Campus. My name is Wally Zhou, and I'm from the School of Political Science and Economics. And today I want to share with you some thoughts about the topic of democratization. I will show you some of pictures I have taken. I will tell you about a case study of democratization. And most importantly, I would like you to think about some questions in terms of the causes and the factors contributing to democratization. All right, so let's get started. A few years ago, I had a chance to visit Poland on a business trip. And I stopped by a city called Gdansk on the Baltic coast, that is the northern part of Poland. And I came to this place, as you can see here on this photo, with a former shipyard building in the background. In the foreground, you see this memorial with 3 crosses. And a close-up shot on one of these crosses shows certain dates inscribed on the memorial. As you can see here, 1956, 1970, 1980, 1981. What do these dates refer to? These are actually attempts at democratizing what was then an authoritarian Poland under the single-party rule of the communists. Obviously, these attempts did not succeed, and that's why there were further attempts. But what happened? And did Poland eventually democratize? Well, in this, what used to be a shipyard, a strike, a labor dispute broke out in 1980. And the strikers formed a committee and made some demands on the communist government. They wrote their demands on these wooden panels. The former shipyard building, by the way, has been converted into a museum. And these pictures you see here are ones that I took in the museum. So they wrote out, the strikers, they wrote out their demands, totaling 21 items on these 2 wooden panels. So what were they asking the government to do? Well, as typical of labor disputes anywhere in the world, they were asking for labor rights. They wanted free trade unions to be recognized. There were trade unions in Poland at that time, but they were basically controlled by the Communist Party. So the strikers wanted an independent trade union. They wanted their right to strike to be guaranteed. And they wanted better working conditions, including higher pay. So far, so typical. They went a bit beyond working conditions to ask for daycare centers and kindergartens for their children, and paid maternity leave for their spouses. But what made this incident important was that the strikers also included in their list of 21 demands, and by the way, the numbers listed on the slides correspond to the demands written on the wooden panels I showed in the previous slide. They also asked for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the release of political prisoners, and transparency about the country's socioeconomic conditions, which at that time were quite bad. This is a picture, by the way, showing how the strikers displayed these demands on the wooden panels. Okay. So the question is, how did the communist government respond? Okay. This is a key question when it comes to democratization. Okay. Usually a group of people would make demands on an authoritarian government. Okay. And the authoritarian government could choose to respond in different ways. It could choose to concede. It could choose to accept some demands, but not others. It could choose to send in military or police forces to suppress these protesters. It could even choose to call on friendly foreign powers to intervene on their behalf. So how did the Polish government at that time respond? Well, in December of 1981, the leader of Poland, the head of the Communist Party in Poland, General Jaruzelski here, made a broadcast on TV declaring martial law. As he's banning the strike, he sent in the troops to arrest leading members and other participants of the strike. And here you see some mugshots of the strike participants being arrested. Right? And in addition to the strikers themselves, right, other members of civil society in Poland got involved, and the government also targeted some of them. Perhaps the most famous or notorious example was the case of a young Catholic priest. Here you see a memorial inside the church where this priest used to serve. Okay. In his sermons, he often expressed public support for the strikers. So he became a target in the eyes of the government. Eventually, the secret police was deployed and they kidnapped this priest. They dragged him into the car. They drove to the shore of a lake. They tied a big stone to his foot and threw him into the lake, so he drowned. Okay. And when this was revealed, when his body was discovered and his funeral was held, right, this became a rallying point for opponents of the regime, because it revealed the brutality of the communist government. Despite all this repression, as the economy of Poland deteriorated, and as the former Soviet Union, which was the main backer of the communist regime, as the former Soviet Union adopted a policy of no longer intervening to back up communist regimes in Central Europe, the Polish government was eventually compelled to stop the repression and instead to negotiate with the protesters. The protesters had formed an organization called Solidarity. Okay, so the Solidarity movement. And here you see a picture in 1989 of the government inviting leaders of the Solidarity movement to sit around a table to discuss reform proposals. Okay. This became known as the Round Table Talks. And as a result of the Round Table Talks, elections, free elections, were to be allowed for the first time since the communists came to power in the late 1940s. And you see here an iconic poster showing with the solidarity sign in red in the background, showing a cowboy, in this case, not holding a gun, but holding a ballot, right, in preparation for the election. The agreement, as I said, the roundtable talks between the communist government and the Solidarity movement reached an agreement in April of 1989 that legally recognized trade unions. That was one of the key demands back in 1980. A new position was created, the position of the presidency, right? And perhaps most importantly, a bicameral legislature, that is, a legislature with two chambers, was established, and free elections to some of these legislative seats were allowed. Okay. So think about why the government had chosen to negotiate and to make some concessions. Okay. What are the conditions that drove the government to no longer persist with repression? Okay. So elections were to be held, and the Solidarity movement now put up candidates across the country. And here you can see some very simple election posters, basically featuring Lech Wałęsa, who was the leader of the Solidarity movement, having his picture taken with each local candidate. Okay. And there were posters calling on people to vote, no matter how sick you get, no matter how difficult it might be for you to get to the polling booth, please go and vote. So what was the result of the election? In the lower chamber of the legislature, remember I said as a result of the roundtable talks, two chambers of the legislature were established. In the lower chamber, the seats won by the Solidarity movement are shown here in yellow. Okay, so shown here in yellow. They won 165 seats. Okay, now you said the entire parliament consists of 460 seats. So 165 doesn't sound bad, but it's far from overwhelming, right? It's a little more than just 1/3 of the seats. And by the way, the communists, they won, they had even more seats shown in red. So just looking at this distribution of seats in the lower chamber of the Polish parliament, it seems that the communists still retain a lot of support. Right? And the Solidarity movement had some support, but was not that popular. Well, that would not be an accurate interpretation of the results, because according to the roundtable agreement, only a certain number of seats in the lower chamber were open to free elections. Specifically, 165 seats were open to free elections, and Solidarity won every single one of these seats. And in the newly created upper chamber of 100 seats, Solidarity won 99 out of 100. The remaining one was won by an independent. The communists did not win a single seat. In other words, it was an overwhelming victory for the Solidarity movement and a disastrous defeat for the incumbent communist government. So the government felt they had no choice but to recognize the victory of the Solidarity movement and to appoint Tadeusz Mazowiecki, one of the leaders of the Solidarity movement, as the new prime minister. And he became the first non-communist leader, not only in Poland, but anywhere in Central Europe since the late 1940s. And this opened the way to democratization, not only in Poland, but also in several neighboring countries. Right? People in neighboring countries saw what happened in Poland. People in what was then Czechoslovakia, people in Hungary, people in other Eastern European countries saw the example of Poland and asked themselves, if Poland could do it, why not us? And this got the ball rolling. Okay. So within just 1 or 2 years, you had many long-lasting communist regimes in Central Europe falling one after another, and mostly in peaceful circumstances. Okay. And within 2.5 years, the Soviet Union collapsed, and that was the end of the Cold War. Okay. So in that sense, Poland was a pioneer. Okay. And today, I think everybody would recognize Poland as a democratic country. This is not to say that there are no problems with Polish democracy. Just to cite some recent examples, here's a picture of Gersdorf, who used to be the head of the High Court in Poland, but she and some of her colleagues, who often disagreed with the incumbent government, were forced into retirement. The government passed a law in 2017 lowering the retirement age, and Gersdorf and some other judges were, because they exceeded this new retirement age of 65, they were kicked off the court, and the government could appoint new judges who would make more favorable rulings for the government. So in other words, this is an attempt at judicial interference by the executive, right? Doesn't sound very democratic. Another example some of you might have heard of is that some regions of Poland, right, particularly in the southeastern part of the country, as you can see on this map, marked in red, declare themselves LGBT-free zones. In other words, homosexuality will not be recognized, and these people will not be given rights that others in society enjoy. Okay. Again, you can say this doesn't sound very democratic, right? If certain sections of the population are discriminated against. So there are certainly some problems with how democracy operates in Poland. Nevertheless, I think everybody would accept that Poland today, despite these problems, is a much more democratic society compared to 40 years ago, before the Solidarity movement began. Okay. So, in summary, what's the takeaway points from this very short lecture? Well, think about the factors which allowed or helped Poland to democratize. Right? It started with the Solidarity movement. It started with the strike. Right? The Solidarity movement was formed initially based on the strikers in the Gdansk shipyard. Right? You had in the background a deteriorating economy and also a changing international dynamic with specifically the changing role of the former Soviet Union. Okay. You had a communist leader, right, choosing initially repressive tactics, but eventually feeling compelled to sit down with members of the opposition and negotiate and reach a compromise agreement. General Jaruzelski, the communist leader, eventually became president for a short period. Remember, the roundtable talks created the post of the presidency. But he was only there for a short time, and after him, it was Lech Wałęsa, the leader of the Solidarity Movement, with whom all the candidates had their pictures taken for the elections. And you see Wałęsa here in the middle. He became the first president of a democratic Poland in 1990. Okay. Was this path the only one possible? Looking back, do we say, oh, of course it's going to happen? It's inevitable that Poland, given the circumstances at the time, would become a democracy. Well, in history, there are very, very few things that we can describe as inevitable, because other paths, other alternatives are possible. Right? Think about this. In another part of the world, at the same time, you also had large-scale protests demanding some measure of liberalization, of democratization. And in this case, the leader of the Communist Party, so this country has also been under the rule of the Communist Party by that stage for 4 decades. Right? And the leader, instead of sitting down and talk and negotiate with the protesters, ordered a crackdown. And I think all of you have heard of the Tiananmen Square incident. And incidentally, and perhaps ironically, these two events took place on the same day. On the 4th of June, 1989, you had the first round of free elections in Poland, opening the way to democracy. And at the same time, you had this crackdown on in China on students demanding democratization. And we know that since then, right, Poland and China have taken very different paths in terms of the political system they have. We're not here to judge who was right, who was wrong, which path was better or worse. But as you can see, there's nothing inevitable about the outcome. It's a matter of individual choices. It's a matter of what leaders or leadership circles, as well as ordinary citizens, what they have chosen to do based on their attitudes, based on their beliefs, based on their values. Okay. And you get very, very different outcomes. Right? So think about what exactly made Poland embark on a path of democratization, and why was the same path not taken in China? And think about how the lessons may or may not be applied to other countries around the world. That's all for this short lecture. Thank you very much for listening.